Welcome to your awakening. Please take all as your reality is adjusted.
Oh, forgot I had it set to repeat. The repeat button turned on the video player. No matter, it worked. And there we go. Yeah, looks like it's all going. Hello to everyone in the chat room so far. Welcome back, folks, once again to another edition of Excalibre on this Moon Day evening. It's the 22nd of the 7th, 2019. Just gone the 8 p.m. So a minute or two late, you know, it's sort of like habit now, isn't it, really? It says 8 p.m., but that's a bit of an ish. Sometimes it's a little bit after. And yeah, I've still got that notification from Google. Don't forget, Hangouts are going away on August the 1st. So next Monday will be the last episode in this current format. However we do it differently after that is, you know, it's going to be different. So this is the last, not this, so this is the penultimate. Next week will be the last one of these Hangout format styles, unless we can figure out some other way around it, like doing a double broadcast, a double video kind of thing. Because if I can connect on a Hangout to the other guys and then use something like OBS or whatever to capture that screen and broadcast it to YouTube, then basically we'll be doing this job without the Google in between bit. And so that's basically all they're taking away, as far as I know anyway. This functionality of connecting a Hangout to YouTube so it live streams as an event, that is being shut down. Hangouts on Air, as the Google system has named it. So anyway, yes, welcome back. I wasn't here last week. Apologies for not turning up and last minute kind of notification. Well, I mentioned it on Wednesday night, so a few days notification, but I didn't know until Wednesday that I had an appointment to be at on Monday that I knew would mean I'd either not be ready in time to do the broadcast or I just wouldn't be in the right frame of mind for doing it. So I thought, no, just leave it for last week. And in a way, a kind of synchro-mystic fashion, that means this penultimate episode is number 26. Next week will be number 27. So in effect, this current season of Excalibre is going to join the 27 club, because once they cancel the Hangout, however we do it after that, it's going to be different slightly. So, you know, in a kind of pedantic, semantic way, I can say, oh, yeah, let's join the 27 club now, because next week will be the 27th edition and the second season. So it's a good way of sort of switching it over a bit. I might start season 3 or something. I don't know yet. Like I said, we're still talking about how we're going to do it as we carry on, whether it's going to be live broadcast or pre-recorded that we can then put up as a premiere. There's lots of choices. You know, there's lots of possibilities. It's just a matter of getting that done and organised. So anyway, yeah, welcome to the penultimate. And this week, there's been quite a lot of stuff going on over the last couple of weeks since I've done the last episode. I had a little bit of a rant on Wednesday night on the reality chat show about some of the stuff going on. Because typically I have a night off, as it were, in effect a week off, considering I only do one broadcast a week. And then loads of stuff happens. I've had that effect multiple times in the past where it's like, oh, I'm not going to do a broadcast such and such week. And then lo and behold, there's loads of news during the week. And it's like, oh, I could talk about this, and talk about that, and talk about this. Yeah, just save it up. keep saving those words up like in a little piggy bank. Keep putting the ideas in there, taking note of the things that's going on in the news, and putting them in that little jar, the memory jar, member jar. Do you remember? But anyway, before I get too silly and colloquial and just chatting shit, which is some of what this is. But anyway, in the info box as a title this week, because of some of the stuff going on, and there's plenty of other things that all link in. Maybe some of it's a little bit tenuous, but you know what I'm like. I'll get to explaining why I'm thinking this way and how the concentric circles belie a spiral from the circle, from the innermost circle as it grows and spreads out. So we think we're seeing concentric circles that are not connected, but there is actually a spiral that connects them all together. Yeah, so much stuff going on. In the title in the info box, the 50th anniversary, because if you're not aware, it's the 50th anniversary of the moon landing, the alleged moon landing, the do you really believe it moon landing, do you think we'll ever go back again moon landing, but don't forget how fantastic it was moon landing, and all that cultural romanticism, you know, reliving the past in that kind of, oh, the glory days, and they wheel out the old folks who tell you about, oh, I remember watching it on the telly and we were doing this and we were doing that. Interesting timing for some of this stuff happening this year. And as an additional sort of subtitle, which maybe connects the two together, it's Space Force. If you didn't know, I have mentioned it a few times in recent months, but now we've got Space Force since the official announcement, because this stuff has been going on obviously for decades, a bit kind of like Moonraker, James Bond Moonraker style. There's been stuff going on up there that the agencies and the militaries of all the different spacefaring nations have been busy up there in space or in near Earth atmosphere. They may not necessarily be technically in space. Like the ISS, the International Space Station, is not technically in space. It's in high Earth atmosphere, high Earth orbit. So anyway, yeah, there's been stuff going on for decades, but recently it's been brought to the front more and more and more. I've sort of pointed a signpost back to Werner von Braun many times, just to say to people, like, go and have a look at that guy, go and look at the history around him, the paperclip, Project Paperclip, and all the involvement towards the space age, the space race, and the espionage around rocket technology, space technology, nuclear technology. It is a very big and complicated web, but there are some very distinct patterns and directions, agendas basically become obvious. The longer you look over the span of the history, you can see how these things have gone stepping stone style towards a certain agenda, or towards potentially a certain conclusion. So yeah, not so long ago, President Trump, President Trump made the official announcement that there would be a new branch of the military in the USA that would be called Space Force. Space Force! And it will be fantastic and wonderful and everybody will love it. It will be amazing and he's such a great guy, all that kind of Trumpism. But not so long ago, only a couple of weeks ago, coincidentally, not coincidentally, it's just a facade of coincidence, just after Bastille Day. I'm not sure if the official announcement was made on Bastille Day. It might have been, I'm not certain, because I was just seeing it in my news feed, so they might have been telling me the day after kind of thing. Or the news report I saw may have been dated the day after. But yes, Macron has also now announced officially that the French are going to have a space force. Macron, who was like an attentive puppy when Trump was around, when Trump visited France, and you know that classic scene that they still use on the ODN news channel, what used to be ITN, where Trump, oh, just brush this bit of dandruff off your shoulder to Macron, and Macron's there like, and now Macron is announcing officially that the French are also going to have a space force. And he even actually said space force. I don't know whether that's down to the translation or whether they've decided to actually call it space force. I don't know. We'll see with that. Maybe he just meant we are having a force that happens to be in space, so therefore it is a space force. Maybe. I don't know. But far beyond coincidence that he used the same terminology as Trump, calling it Space Force. So, Space Force! Why does that seem relevant at the moment with all the other shit that's going on? What are you talking about that shit for, Cookie? Do you know Area 51 is all just a bullshit psyop? I agree. The Storm Area 51 thing that they're playing out is up to something like 1.7 million people have now signed up to either be interested in or definitely going to join in with a Naruto-run storming of Area 51. It's all comedy, it's meme war crap, and it wouldn't surprise me if it's got counterintelligence influences in its beginning and its growth in popularity and notoriety, because it's all over the news. So, you know, it's not like it's something really genuinely secret or important, such that the news will be on a D-notice or being deliberately used to direct people away from that story. No, they want you to see it more and more and more. Combined with the, hey, did you know it's the 50th anniversary? Hey, didn't you know we all went to the moon? It was great when we went to the moon, wasn't it? Whee, let's do it again. Maybe when we can figure out how, possibly. But we're going to go to Mars. But, you know, let's not talk about whether we can actually even get back to the moon again first, but we're going to go to Mars. I'm being deliberately silly, facetious, a bit sarcastic, because a lot of this is all talking points that have been going on for quite a number of years. And it's just, you know, the fact that it is the 50th anniversary means NASA and the other space agencies get front center stage. So they're all, you know, trying to push their stuff, get the attention, get the funding, you know, because they all want to pursue their scientific interests and whatever. And of course, the big corporate conglomerates want to actually start getting out into space so they can start exploiting that new territory, because it will be the ultimate gold rush or oil rush. Maybe we should rename that as resource rush. Whatever the resource is, whether it's gold or oil or sugar or whatever, they're all champing at the bit to get out there and get on with it and start exploiting those resources. And just the sheer territory, the territorial space, the volume of area available for them to do whatever in, you know, to build a space station or a platform or whatever. They're all desperately wanting to get out there. So even though there is seemingly, use that word loosely because I'm not saying there isn't, I'm pointing more at the way it's presented in the general media. There is seemingly a lot going on in various parts of the world, you know, like the tanker crisis, which I'll come back to. You know, there's various stuff going on, but they want to make sure you don't forget about the space. NASA. We're going back to space. We're going to start exploring. We're going to go back to the moon, all that good stuff. Because we are at that change, that shifting paradigm point where now the near-Earth territory of the high atmosphere, or space is the generalized name for it, is going to start getting brought into the fold, getting conglomerated into the system of nation states and all that kind of system stuff that they love to do, while they're switching the globe, the planet, the population primarily, rather than the physical geology of the planet itself, but that's somewhat part of it. But they're switching us all into this new world agenda, this new world system, a single global system that is tied together via the internet technology, the telecommunications technology. So if you're not ready to go out to space yet, don't worry, your children will get the opportunity. And that's not a, stretching out there into the distant future like it was when I was a little kid. When I was a little kid, it was one of those kind of fantasy jobs, So what do you want to be when you grow up? Oh, I want to be an astronaut like Buck Rogers. So, like Buck Rogers, right? But you get the idea. It was something that was so out there, it was not exactly achievable for the vast majority of people. For a handful, maybe, but not for the vast majority. And it certainly wasn't something that was going to become almost commonplace, because within the next maybe couple of decades up to 2050, it is going to become more and more commonplace. And it will become a new job market in many ways. There might be high-end professional, high-level jobs and whatever, but the dominance of the space agencies such as NASA, they're gonna be forced to franchise out in one way or another. They've already started doing that for the past several years with things like Virgin Space and Elon Musk and all that lot. So it's commercialization, basically, because it's allowing private companies into the space race, and that will soon enough lead to private employees. In other words, private astronauts, private cosmonauts, people who work for a corporation, not for a government. They will soon be allowed to go and start doing stuff in high atmosphere. And maybe not necessarily out in space, towards the moon or further or whatever, but they're certainly going to start being allowed to set up platforms and stuff like that. If you haven't noticed, maybe you have, and we can certainly have a conversation about how maybe a lot of this stuff is simply because of the increasing commonality of video recording equipment and the interconnected, the internet technology, such that people capturing videos of stuff, it can easily be spread and rapidly moved around, etc. But there have been more recorded asteroids or comets or whatever it is that the selected experts tell us these things are. There's been more falling stars or fireballs from the sky over the last few years than there has been, I think, really, for my living memory, in terms of stuff that is pushed through the mainstream media, that there is video evidence of, that there is multiple witness evidence of, things like that. Whereas it might have been fairly commonplace for you to read, in some little article on the back pages of some newspaper, something about an asteroid that fell in a desert somewhere. Back in the day, back in the years before the internet, you come across that thing occasionally, that kind of thing occasionally. Even though, I know there are lots of falling asteroids yearly, every year across the planet. There are quite a few. It's not a completely rare thing that hardly ever happens. No, there's quite a few. But doesn't mean they're like the great big ones that everybody's scared of and stuff like that. No, they're small things, if they even survive the transit from space to the surface. But in recent years, there's been more and more reports of fireballs falling in the sky. And we're commonly told, like the ones that have been reported over Russia recently, stuff like that, these are just asteroids, and we're just lucky that there was somebody around, or there was somebody with a video camera, or there was a security camera on the side of a building. It's just lucky that we happened to capture it on video. Is it just luck? Or is it because the numbers are increasing? And is it the numbers are increasing because of actual asteroids numbers increasing, falling to the planet? Or is it something else falling out of the sky? a lot of the older satellites, the satellite networks that were initially begun in earnest in the 70s, once the military, the agencies had started doing their thing, and sort of sending out their first explorations and their first spy satellites and stuff like that. And then eventually the commercial market was allowed to start putting things up like telecommunications satellites, research satellites, etc., etc. A lot of them are quite old now. Over the years, some of them have obviously been shut down, turned off, or crushed to the ground to destroy them, to get them out of the sky, because it's dangerous with all that junk floating around up in the atmosphere. But I'm just speculating on whether could it be that there is a seeming increase in the numbers being reported simply because there is that older stock, there is now that legacy stock of the older satellites that are being gradually decommissioned in one way or another, and new ones being sent up now rapidly at a pace by companies like Virgin and Musk and whatever else. Maybe it is that, but maybe it's more that there happens to be conflict or contesting over certain territorial square footage, territorial space up in space. How do you say territorial space in space? It's the territory in space. Maybe there is contesting going on about whose satellites are allowed where. There's a global unification to a large degree, and this is one of those elements that for many people, I found when you start sort of pointing out the corporatism of the infrastructure across the globe, it helps them see the system as that big picture, rather than seeing only a singular nation point of view or national point of view with maybe, opposition with another nation or something like that. Whereas the reality is there are things such as the UCC, the Universal Criminal Code, I think it's called, as far as I remember, which is an internationally agreed set of laws, set of rules that governs trade between nations and trade between the big mega banks, things like that. You're supposed to have things like the LIBOR Treaty, if you remember that, where they're supposed to have this contractual agreement that means the banks won't exploit people by fucking around with the exchange rates and all that kind of shit, which of course they did, but they're supposed to, stick to this agreement. Universal Commercial Code. Thank you, Steve. Just put in the chat. Hi, Steve. Hello to everyone in the chat. I will come back and say hello in a minute. But yeah, Universal Commercial Code is that sort of international rule book. And there is the international laws as sort of embodied by the UN. And most of the time, most of the nations around the globe do adhere to that, and they generally agree to it and, go along with it. Obviously, there's major exceptions to that, like recently Israel destroying settlements, Palestinian settlements and stuff like that. Israel's one of the main bad actors when it comes to ignoring that internationally agreed set of rules, because they'll just ignore the international community and do whatever the hell they want. But they demand that you support them because they're the victims. Anyway, I don't want to digress onto that. But there is a general agreement. There's obviously definitive contractual agreements, such as the Universal Code. That is a contractual thing. The governments actually sign on to that directly. But there's also that kind of general agreement that they don't want to have global conflict over certain things, because then everybody loses out, including themselves. And this is most easily exemplified by the insistence or the deliberate structuring of things of society in general, such that commerce is enabled at every possibility. because one of the core things that the system is obsessed with is keeping the flow of commerce going. And we could get into a discussion about the differences in the way commerce is transacted, whether it's capitalist or nationalistic, consumerist, socialist, whatever. They're all political boxes of ideological manipulation. But the main core principle, the main foundation is that commerce is enabled and allowed to flow. So a lot of our law and legal structure is about enabling that and making sure that that is not impeded, because that movement of information or the transfer of data, which is a very basic way of describing exchange of commerce, it's that exchange of information. I give you +1 whatever and you pay me plus whatever I want back in exchange. Exchanges of information, that is allowed to keep going, because whether there's conflicts over contracts or national borders or whatever, the resolutions to those conflicts are never going to happen if the movement of information is curtailed. So if you've got two opposing sides and you want them to resolve their conflict, if there's a wall in between those two opposing sides, they're never going to be able to get together to make any kind of resolution. So enabling the transfer of information, enabling commerce or interaction, interchange, is essential for you to just open up the possibility of there being a resolution to the conflict in the first place. So one of the key foundations of the system is to enable the flow of commerce. There's bad sides to that, obviously. That's why we end up with the kind of pyramidal structure, because a handful of people end up dominating the flow of commerce, the flow of stuff, the flow of energy. So they get raised up with a massive differential between them and the poorest people, that kind of thing. But that then brings me to mentioning about the tankers. And today, Iran announcing that they've captured a load of alleged CIA spies, and they're more than likely going to execute some of them. I think we're well beyond the Rubicon now. And I know for years, people have spun their wheels over this point about fear porn and doom porn and all this kind of shit. But at some point, you've got to be realistic and not over-romanticize or use false hope to try and delude yourself that there is no danger on the horizon. Because if you keep sailing towards that storm, saying, oh, look at the lovely storm, look at the rainbow sticking out the side of that storm. Isn't it amazingly lovely the way the rain goes horizontally by the wind's force? That's wonderful, isn't it? It's beautiful. You're deluding yourself as you led to the gallows. Yeah, you get a nice view from the gallows, but you're still on the gallows. And for years, I've talked about this point of view about being careful, walking that fine line, walking that knife edge between, are you falling into what could be defined as fear porn or doom porn, where you are fixating on the negative just for the sake of some kind of macabre need to see the negative, the bad side, the doom that is possibly there if you continue that pathway? Or are you just being realistic and honest and objective in your observations of, this is potentially immensely dangerous? You would be an idiot to ignore that potential storm on the horizon. Because if you just keep trolling along, la 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 la, keep walking, no, just ignore the storm, doesn't matter, it's outside my peripheral vision, I don't care, la la la, you're going to get fucked royally. They wear a purple condom. That's what it means to get fucked royally. You wear a purple condom. I'm just making that shit up just for a laugh, but you get the point, hopefully. So I'm not going to belabor the point about doom porn or whatever. If you see this as being doom porn, If this shit makes you afraid such that you don't want to hear it because you just want to turn it off and stick your head in the sand, you carry on and do that. I'm not going to. Yeah, I'll quite happily, I'm just saying that in the sense of I will do it. I will keep talking about this stuff, whether people think it's doom porn or fear porn or whatever. I suggest, and in my experience and observation of the way people interact with information and stuff like this, most of the time when people talk about fear porn, it is their own projection because they themselves are afraid of what they're being shown. Fear is the mind killer. When you say that to people, people get I feel that the wrong idea, the misimpression, the misinterpretation that what you're saying to them is that means you shouldn't be in fear. So in other words, you should erase everything in your life that causes fear. You know, this is part of the modern generation, social media generation, narcissistic, solipsistic problem, that they want to be able to erect a bubble of personal dimension around themselves where anything negative or bad or fearful is removed, is excluded, is banned, is not allowed. Whereas really, fear is the mind killer. What that phrase is saying to you from the Dune stories, you know, if you haven't read them, go and read them. It's interesting stuff and very applicable to a lot of what's going on now. But really, what that phrase is saying to you is, why has your mind stopped? Why has your mind gone dead from fear? Fear's not gone away. It's just caused you to drop down dead. It's caused you to go into that learned helpless response where you shut down and you do nothing. That's why it's the mind killer. It stops your thinking, and your thinking drives everything. So you stop the thinking, all activity stops. So really what it should be saying to you, what it is saying to you, and how you should interpret that, I feel, I argue, my point of view, whatever, fear is the mind killer means stop letting fear be the mind killer. Fear is there. If you have no fear of nothing, there's probably something wrong with you. There is a clinical diagnosis for people that suffer no fear whatsoever. And the very concept of there being zero fear whatsoever in existence, you know, at all, is idiotic. Maybe in some, you know, fantastical, distant, utopian future where everybody has everything they ever wanted, you know, a bit kind of like Ray Kurzweil's connected universe utopia kind of thing. Maybe then it might actually be something that could be enacted where you have zero fear. But throughout our history, throughout our accumulation of knowledge and observation of the universe we live in, and the use of people's reasoning and logic and intuition, fear is actually beneficial because it helps you survive. Full stop. Fear helps you survive. Not the concept that by being in fear you will live, but the fact that fear is there makes you aware of things that are dangerous to you or potentially dangerous to you. So you take heed of the fear and you change what you do, and you change direction, you change your actions, etc., etc., etc. So fear is there as a perception to help you redirect your own energy so that you don't hit that shit that you're afraid of. So this ridiculous concept that there should be no fear in your life and that you should never ever hear or see or consider or think about anything that makes you fearful is self-defeating, as in defeating yourself. You're working against yourself. If you just see something fearful and go, oh God, I don't want to look, turn it off, or forget about it, I'll go and do something else. It's good to be going and doing something else, but that's not good if the thing that caused you fear is potentially a possibility in your reality, such that by ignoring it, you are potentially doing yourself harm. So my point being about this stuff going on at the moment with these tankers, with the I thought about putting as the subtitle the tit for tat, tat for tit. Who needs some tits? I've got some tat. You know, I'm just taking the piss about how the way it's being portrayed in the media at the moment is they're going through the same motions that they've done with the other conflicts that have been played off on this same justification before, where they'll go, oh, it's just tit for tat. They took one of our tankers, so we're taking one of their tankers. And, oh, you know, they're flying their planes on our borders, so we fly our planes on their borders. It's just tit for tat, folks. It's just saber rattling, nothing going on here. It's gone far beyond that. When the Iranians are taking control of what are being called British tankers, although if you look at it, chatting with some of the guys before we started, and you know, it's been mentioned that those tankers aren't exactly British. They may be traveling under British papers, but this is something that's a commonality in the shipping industry. The ships operate as independent traders, so they will adopt the flag, the sovereignty of whatever suits their need to carry out the contract. So if they're carrying cargo that's been bought by a British company and insured through British companies, then they'll adopt the British flag, and every time they go for a port or whatever, they're considered a British ship, even if the ship itself is not owned by a British company or individual private company, whatever. So a lot of that is a bit sort of, you know, go back to what I was saying earlier about that international trade, you know, and how they'll just put whatever flag is required to enable the trade to carry on, to enable that contract to be fulfilled, the exchange, the business to carry forward. But the very fact that they've got to this stage where they are taking these kind of actions, this is now a step beyond just sanctions. Even though some of the political speak at the moment is, I think Trump's mentioned about maybe ramping up the sanctions again, things like that. This is a step beyond the sanctions. Normally, when blockades, which is what a sanction is a blockade on a country, which means you're trying to restrict that flow of exchange, that flow of goods and information, etc. Yeah. So like I was saying earlier, when you're building a wall, what was Trump put in place? What was he selected to do? To build walls, not a physical wall on the Mexico border. No, he's building psychological walls between people, between cultures, between nation states, etc., etc. He's forcing divides to create a Hegelian process that they can then utilize in their agendas. But we've gone a step beyond just sanctions now. If they're going to start taking each other's ships, that's the only next step is direct conflict. And if we've come this far now, based on the repeated pattern of methodology that has gone on over the last several years, plus other evidence that I could spend hours literally just putting evidence in front of you that has been built up over the past 2 decades, because a lot of this goes back to the first Gulf War and some of the balls that were put in motion back then by Daddy Bush. This is not, you know, just a recent agenda. The Project for the New American Century came out before the turn of the millennium, you know, things like that. And the whole 9/11 debacle, you know, all adds into this process. So this is not something just recent. But there is a wealth of evidence that shows that this has been the intention all along, that they were working towards setting the playground, setting the chessboard up such that they would be able to have a justification to begin a direct conflict with Iran. And once they do, you know, get beyond the fear. I always point at Brucey with this stuff because he was really good at talking about how to deal with fear. Yeah. But get beyond the fear of the potentiality of all this shit that's going down. We've got comedy politicians like Bojo waiting in the wings to step in and distract most of the UK public with his whiff-waff and his buffoonery and his silly hair, Meanwhile, in the background, if there's no actually any current sitting prime minister, supposedly, how are they dealing with all these conflicts when there's going to need to be a head of state to sign paperwork and shit like that? You know, they want to send in troops, the SBS or whatever, to go in and figure out what the Iranian military forces are doing, what their navy's doing at the moment. That's going to require sanction by a signature somewhere up in the bureaucracy, in the hierarchy. But supposedly we haven't really exactly got a working parliament here in the UK at the moment. And pretty soon they're all going on fucking holiday. So at a time when they're all just about to kick back and go off on holiday and, we'll be back in a few months, guys, to actually run the country. Don't worry, we left the keys on the sideboard for you. Meanwhile, there's all this serious stuff going on in the Middle East. And this is, as I say, built on the back of a gradually increasing agenda towards certain goals. If they begin a direct conflict with Iran, it will escalate. Again, I'll repeat the fact that if you think this is doom porn or whatever, carry on. I don't care. That's up to you. But if you can look at this and rationally follow through the methodology that they have been repeating again and again and again, and their own stated intentions of what they want to do and where they want to take the entire world, because you're going to get dragged along with it whether you like it or not, that is what they're going to do. It may not necessarily, and I've used the word potential a lot this evening, I hope you get that. You know, I'm talking about things that at the moment they are potentialities. Other steps have to occur before that ends up being a reality, but we're going that direction. We're still sailing towards that storm at the moment. If they carry on the way they're going, that conflict that they generate, it may not necessarily become an all-out global conflict the way that the fear is often portrayed. When you are repeatedly told that you're just a crazy conspiracy theorist because you talk about the possibility of World War III, and World War III is never going to happen, mate. We've had all our world wars. You're just living in doomland. Look at the definition of what defines a world war. Look again around the world at the global conflicts that are currently occurring. Take into consideration that modern warfare is no longer 3 lines of soldiers facing each other on opposing sides, and the front rank fires, and the second rank fires, and the third rank fires. That's not the kind of warfare we fight anymore, because the technology enables tangential warfare, full spectrum warfare, asymmetrical warfare. There's warfare going on at the moment on the internet. There's warfare going on at the moment on the social media. There's warfare going on YouTube. So please consider what you define as a world war. There are a lot of proxy conflicts going on around the world at the moment that are in one way or another fed, fueled, enabled, and continued by the big players supplying the smaller units, the proxy forces, with what they need to carry on their conflict. And a lot of them, the big players in the background don't care if it's just an ethnic disagreement, if it's some kind of race hate feud that's been going on for generations. They don't care. They'll just feed both sides the weapons and the money they need to shoot at each other, because what they're after is the conflict and the chaos and the degeneration of the nation state model that we have been in for the last few hundred years, so that they can switch it into a singular global model. Please reconsider what defines a world war, and look again at all the stuff that's going on at the moment. If you want to keep the kind of imagery of a world war being all the nations fighting each other and firing nuclear missiles at each other and rows of tanks all lining up to fight, yeah, there's a potential of that level of conflict occurring. but I don't think it's likely to go that far in the way they will utilize the war, utilize a war to push the world through that paradigm shift. They don't need to take it that far. They can use a bit of selective extreme force in certain areas, which will enable them to redefine borderlines and stuff like that, because they could irradiate a large area of a certain landmass, and then that will force refugees in other directions. So in effect, they can force people to relocate to areas where they want them, similar to a lot of what's going on with the immigration movement at the moment, the Kalergi plan kind of stuff that's happening. That's the same thing. They are forcibly making people move to the areas that in the big agendas, Agenda 21, Agenda 2030, the New World Order agenda, the UN goals, those are the places that they want the massive population. So they could do something like that, do limited nuclear warfare. This is also what I think I did point this out a few weeks ago when it happened in the news, or when it was announced in the news. They've all dropped the international treaties on the limitation of nuclear development. They've all now dropped them. I think it started with Trump, but then Russia dropped it as well. And they've all given up on that international agreement now, that contract that they'd all signed on to. So that means they're all busy developing new ways of delivering nuclear armaments, smaller, tactical, smart nukes that will only do just a little bit of damage. They're not going to destroy the whole nation. They're just a little hole just here, just where we need it. That kind of shit is moving ahead a pace, as well as I do think that there is foundational stuff happening up in the higher atmosphere at the moment. And as I mentioned about the falling stars kind of question or speculation, I think a lot of that is what's going down right now. They are all jostling for position in that new territory that is becoming a weaponized environment. So there are weapons pointing down at us. And they're all at it. It's not just the fault of one side or the other. The way international arms races work means they're always one-upping each other constantly. So an old satellite gets shot down, so they send up a new one with new technology on, and then the other side goes, oh, look at their new satellite, we'll build one, and it just keeps going and going and going and escalating and escalating. So the spy ring and the tankers and the Cobra meeting, I forgot to mention that, the emergency Cobra meeting, which supposedly Treason Matrix is attending, because, she's still sort of Prime Minister. She don't care anymore, though. Now she can just do whatever. She put her feet up at the end of the table, show everybody her red shoes. So there you go, look, I made my sacrifice. I did as I was told. I stood in the place for the sacrificial whipping, and now I'm stepping down now, so you can all deal with this fucked up shit. You're going to have a comedy Prime Minister at the same time as you are butting heads with, well, supposedly they're not nuclear armed yet, but, Trump's planning a meeting with Pakistan soon. Pakistan is a nuclear armed nation, and just happens to be part of that shifting alliance that's been bubbling away for the last few years. Turkey's sort of on side, then they're not on side, then they join the other guys, then they're sort of doing their own thing. And the level of chaos, even on the international stage, those international rules are breaking down. Well, the rules aren't breaking. The different players are choosing to ignore them or abuse them. So like capturing tankers. It's piracy, basically, in a simplistic description. It's piracy, and then they turn around and go, oh, they stole one of our ships. How naughty. They're breaking international rules. That's a distinct justification for declaring war. You stole our tanker. Well, didn't you steal our tanker? Oh, no, we were doing it legitimately because we had a license from the government. What, you mean a license just like they used to give to what they call privateers? Pirates, Oh, well, yeah, I suppose if you use that terminology, yeah. Why was it that it was Britain, the UK, that was utilised to begin this process of taking tankers? I think it might simply come back to the fact that we have a long established foundation that spreads across the world. But at the same time, we've got some fairly important military bases in Cyprus and on Gibraltar. And the tanker that the UK confiscated, the supposed Iranian tanker that we confiscated, I say we as if I'm involved in a fucking, the UK confiscated. They took it, they moored it in Gibraltar, I think, or they took it to Gibraltar. And there has been recently, I don't know about how much confirmation there is for this kind of thing, but there has been mention of how there is a lot of GPS interference in the Middle East at the moment, such that it's interfering with commercial air traffic, even as far as Cyprus. And it's been blamed on the Russians and their electronic countermeasure systems, their anti-missile systems, anti-jet systems. And supposedly they've turned it up to that much power, that much volume, they've turned it up to 11, that the effect is reaching as far as Cyprus. What's on Cyprus? The RAF bases that provide the airstrip to dominate most of the Middle East, to control the air over most of the Middle East. So you've got Israel abusing the air by going into Syria to supposedly attack Iranian terrorists. They're bombing Iranian forces, but they're also attacking the Syrians in the same act. And at the same time, you've got that RAF Air Force base in Cyprus that is our footprint over the Middle East. And you see what I mean when I said right at the start how all this stuff starts to link together? It may be that there's some immensely important things happening at the moment on the ground in the Middle East, all these movements, all this supposed tit for tat, which is, like I say, I think it's beyond tit for tat. And meanwhile, they're all talking, well, I say they're all talking about, they're giving us this constant reinforcement of, remember 50 years ago, we went to the moon, Space Force, look up to the skies, look up to the skies, keep an eye out for the aliens, they might turn up and you'll be able to, go and visit them at Area 51 and take them a sandwich. Don't let the fear get to you. Don't ignore it. And don't ignore the potentialities just because they make you afraid. If you're not afraid of some of these potentialities, then you're being a bit daft. Because if you think this stuff won't affect you because it's happening somewhere else in the world, again, you're being short-sighted and a bit daft. This thing has a knock-on effect. Ripple effect will come back to us. Loads of people like to complain in this country. Loads of people like to complain about the immigrants over here. They're coming over here. They're taking our jobs. They're taking our women. They do all that usual rhetoric that gets repeated again and again and again. Why are a lot of them coming over here? Because the nations where they're coming from have been fucked up in one way or another. They've either been economically fucked over, such that those people are economic refugees looking for a better life, a better standard of living, sort of free handouts, whatever, but they're looking for a better standard of living, or they have been literally torn apart from conflict and they've been forcibly directed this way, Kalergi plan style. So if you think it won't affect you, remind yourself of that fallacious rhetoric when next you start complaining about the immigrants taking your job. Because supposedly, if shit happens on the other side of the world, it ain't going to affect you, is it? So you must be imagining that immigrant is in your town taking your job. Because stuff on the other side of the world doesn't affect you. Amazing. Don't fall for the fear. See the fear for what it is. Accept it for what it is. It's a useful tool. It can debilitate you if you let it consume you. But if you put it in its place and recognize it for what it is, like a dog barking to warn you of an intruder, then you can act on that information. Shit could be happening in a very serious fashion soonish. And I know a lot of the times I'm often talking about things that might happen in the future or potentialities or whatever. But that is a large part of what I do. So if you don't like that kind of thing, you're probably tuned into the wrong channel. I can't think of how else to say it, really. As the Zen master says, we shall see. Keep watching, but don't just sit and ignore it. Don't just think it's not going to affect you if it gets worse or if it carries on the way it's going or whatever. Take some time to consider what you would do if things do get more serious. What would you do if you needed to react to shit going down? How would you deal with that? And this is just one possibility of a potential of a conflict beginning or getting worse, because really it has already begun. We're past the beginning. This is just now the justification and the logistical time it takes for them to maneuver forces into place and start the actual fighting, to actually ring the bell to start the first round. But consider other possibilities as well, that a lot of these actions that have been taken on this global stage within the last decade plus have all been part of a process, a charade, to be used as a justification and as a manipulation tool to push people in a certain direction that really is not, it's nothing to do with destroying the world with a final world war conflict. The World War III is going to be the end of everything. It's all just going to be a burnt crisp. They use that fear to drive people. The reality is they will use the excuse, the cover of a major conflict like a world war to make changes such that your children will be living in a completely different world to the one you grew up in. If the agendas continue the way they go in, the wars are just stepping stones towards concluding those agendas. The war is not the end goal. There may be certain groups, certain power players, certain nation states that are following an agenda that sees a final conflict as being their end goal. But I would argue that they're just part of the tapestry that's going on here. And the largest majority are not after that kind of end of the world goal. They're after utilizing that bad news day, perfect day to put out bad news, all that kind of thing. They're looking at utilizing that Phoenix Gate of major conflict to destroy what was there, build their new Babylon, and persuade people that they all want to live there. If you've got no other choice but an irradiated wasteland or living in their super high-tech police state, surveillance states, plugged-in matrix kind of world, I think, most people are going to choose the matrix state. And that's what I think they're planning on more than anything. So, yeah. Anyway, I don't want to belabor the point. If you've never considered this kind of stuff before, as I say, I'm not saying this stuff just to scare you. I'm saying this to be practical. Don't believe the bullshit that comes out the mainstream media propaganda machine that just keeps telling you, oh, tit for tat, don't worry, we're better than them, we're the good guys, we're the biggest, we're the strongest, we'll win, guaranteed, no, nothing to worry about here, folks, nothing to see, move along, buy your shit, go back to work, get on with it. Yeah. Use your own senses, your own eyes and your own mind to look at this stuff and consider how you utilize your energy as things go forward. Because you might have to learn to dance and change your rhythm and learn to walk without rhythm so that you can survive this paradigm of changes. How else can I describe that? Could get into a lot of cliches about the times they are changing and all that kind of stuff. They're always changing because change is inevitable and ubiquitous. This week, I'm mostly trans. I'm thinking about changing, and I'm going through the process of changing into something that's changing. So I'm transforming into something that's transforming, because everything is transforming all the time, constantly, forever. So I'm trans to the power of infinity. In the far distant future, I'm going to be a planet. Anyway, yeah, that's enough silliness. I'm at the end of what was supposedly meant to be a serious point. Don't let the fear control you. And that doesn't mean I'm ridiculing my own argument, but without delusion, without deluding yourself, you can laugh in the face of fear, because you can acknowledge that the fear is a tool for you to use. It's not the end of everything. Fear is the mind killer if you let it be. Anyway, I should shut up now. Sorry, guys. Jump in whenever you want. And
well, it occurred to me with all this Iranian thing, nobody ever talks about a mass boycott of American products. Well, what would you boycott? Now, it's interesting, yeah, because we all know that soy is grown with glyphosate. But the United States is now Europe's biggest soybean supplier. So, anybody that can get the message out there, soy means glyphosate. Stop buying any product with soy in it. It's going to do its little bit to hit America. Yeah? American export.
Yeah. And I laughed a bit, because when you said it, it's sort of like one of those questions like, most people would never do that. That's like, attacking the empire. You're not allowed to attack the empire.
Well, yeah, two birds with one stone. Educate people about soy. It's not good for the European body, incidentally.
No, it isn't. It's not, is it?
No,
soy or corn. Those two products. Avoid them.
Yeah, the corn, because it's been processed. But with soy, it's like Europeans have an enzyme in the stomach for breaking down alcohol. Aboriginals and North Americans don't have that.
Or the Asians.
Chinese, they have and a lot of Asians, they have a special enzyme for breaking down soy.
Yeah.
Do you remember back in the 80s, I think it was, and they started saying, they actually knew about this, and they said, we've got products now, we can make something with soy, you can eat as much as you want, but the body doesn't digest the soy the same way. They knew about it. It was that slimming thing, wasn't it? It was a new idea that you could eat as much as you want of soy, but your body's only going to, digest about 10% of it, and the rest will pass through. So, they've known about it all along, yeah?
Well, yeah, I'm going to say that's not unusual, is it? I mean, they push these things on us. Soy's in everything. I've noticed, if you look at most processed foods and products out there to eat, there's a lot of soy, a lot of aspartame, a lot of GMO corn or whatever it is. There's a lot of that stuff in the food chain, and that's what's affecting people as well. Their energy, you say a psychological war, it's a war on your body as well and your health. And they know these sorts of things, like you say, and they still carry on supplying the food chain with these products, with this poison, with this shit that they'll know will react to over maybe decades.
Yeah,
the soft kill approach,
If anything, it's getting worse, because now they're trying to shift people from manipulated foods, so you kind of GMO agriculture crops, stuff that's still grown out the ground but has been messed with slightly. But now they're trying to encourage people to take up totally synthetic foods. I listened to Jeff C chatting with the one woman who covers a lot of the health subjects, and I can't at the moment recall her name, sorry, but they were talking about that in particular. The fast food chains are now putting out what are basically synthetic foods, like a lab-grown burger. And it's not just meat products, because that has always been a kind of selling point of part of the vegan argument, is like, we can make sort of fake meat. If you're still insistent that you want to eat meat, we can make this fake meat for you. And that I can remember it from years ago. You know, it's been suggested that eventually they'll have lab-grown meat and stuff like that, but it's not just meat anymore. It's lab-grown protein, so they can make it look like whatever. You know, you can have a lab-grown carrot. So it's more about the synthetic rather than anything else. That, you know, they can form it and flavor it to be whatever you fancy, but it's synthetic.
Everything is, isn't it? Virtual reality, synthetic food. It's like again, I was thinking of the bigger picture when all these wars or the potential wars are kicking off again, all these conflicts of the transhumanism agenda. You know, that sort of merging us with the machine, merging us with the technology is what they're doing right now, in effect. And that's getting more and more obvious to people now, I think, you know, with the way that they're trying to push these sort of chips and things like this. And we've talked about it over the years. We've been doing these chats and stuff. And it's been something that, you know, hasn't gone away. It's just got more and more in your face.
I got transhumanized last week.
Yeah. What did you get turned into?
Well, that appointment was part of the process of their making me go on to universal credit. So I've been going through all the process of doing all that sign up, and it's all online, and you have to have a mobile phone number and an email address. You have to. You cannot sign up for it without it, which means that's making me into a cyborg, because I'm now forced to have those items if I want to interact with the state over that policy, that universal credit. Yeah.
And we've seen, like I say, that's become more and more with the technology we see now coming out, with the way people are being sort of led along this smart future, smart thing, everything's smart, everything connected.
You don't have to think for yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
I got a good example of this the other day, and I did some research on it, which, believe it or not, like took me 5 minutes. Everything just lined up, one thing after another. If you could screenshot this, Cookie, what I've got here. See, I saw this sign up on the metro, It's a company called Drivy. And what you basically do is you put your car up there for hire and on a mobile phone app. So a group of people have put their cars forward, and they're now on offer for hire for, it says like 2 days or 2 hours. You know, you can hire whatever you want. So I went and looked at this because Barcelona is the kind of city where people will think up something like this and start their own business. Usually they get bought out. But this wasn't even a Spanish company. Drivy was originally a French company, but they was bought by this company here called Getaround. Now, I looked up the CEOs of these, and the first one I looked at, a woman, she went to a university to study politics. After that, she went to another university, which was this one here, Singularity University. Now, this place is run by a guy called Ray Kurzweil. Okay, have you heard of these names? Yeah. Now, the interesting thing about Getaround, the one that's doing the car app, is that they borrowed their money off a guy whose name I can't remember, who runs a thing called SoftBank. He's a Chinesey guy, Chinesey. But anyway, his name is Masayoshi Son. Now, let's go to this thing here. Kurzweil. Google claims that the singularity will happen by 2045. Remember, his university is called Singularity. Ray Kurzweil, Google's director of engineering, is a well-known futurist with a high-hitting track record for accurate predictions. Kurzweil claims an 86% accuracy rate.
I could probably claim that as well.
The technological singularity will happen sometime in the next 30 years. 2029 is the consistent date I predicted for when an AI will pass a valid Turing test and therefore achieve human levels of intelligence. I've set the date for 2045 for the singularity, which is when we will multiply our effective intelligence a billionfold by merging with the intelligence we have created. So the guys who, and the next paragraph goes into this SoftBank CEO, Masayoshi Son, who financed the Getaround thing. So I'm thinking this AI that we're going to merge with machines is actually bullshit. That's the dream they're holding out. Along the way, of course, you've got car sharing, yeah, which you'll only be able to do if you have, if you access the cars with your mobile phone, which will end up being in your hand.
Yeah.
That's the merger. It's not going to make you more intelligent. It's
certainly not going to be made available to the general populace. If they ever do get to that stage of getting what they call a hard AI, which means a sentience in the way that most people comprehend of a sentient being, totally independent thinking for itself. Even if they do get that, it ain't going to be made available to us lot. They ain't going to say, hey, Cookie, you want to come and plug yourself? We got the AI now. Come and plug yourself in. We'll all be demigods. Way. They ain't going to fucking do that shit, man. It's going to be guys like him in their private little club where they'll go up and build their Elysium satellite platform and they'll live up there and we'll all live down here with the shit.
Because we'd have paid for it all as well, because all the consumption we're doing down here, you see, just taking advantage and, yeah.
And how would most people know or be able to tell the difference if it was a genuine hard AI, as in a true sentience? Because even the Turing test is questionable in terms of its ability in recognizing a true sentience. It can be tricked. Tricked might not be the right word, but it can be persuaded that what it's seeing is genuine sentience when it's not. They've already recently been talking about this, about whether the Turing test is still a good way to gauge these things, because it's starting to creak at the seams. It's starting to find it more and more difficult to differentiate even between something that is an acknowledged fake sentience, a bot, an AI bot.
Mm-hmm.
It's like things like the level of algorithmic intelligence to the average person seems like sentience. To an average person, how would you know? Because somebody like him will step forward and go, hey, I just invented the AI. I'll sell you the plug-in for $10 million each, or you queue up now to buy it at your Apple store. And would you have the ability and knowledge to be able to go through the kind of Turing process and check, well, is this really an AI, or is this just a really good algorithm?
It's a cold, dead machine that's just made of plastic and silicon and bits. It doesn't think, feel. It's not biological. It doesn't have anything other than us who invented it. Us, we man or a mind, a brain created it, and we created it together in a sense. So all of us are mass brains. We are. AI will never be, or well, they're trying to sell it as this. Remember the movies trying to get you to love the machine. Love the robots. That's been going back decades now. That goes back to the 80s,
there has been quite a few of them in the recent years, though.
Yeah, so
really pushed a lot.
They've been planting that for a long, long time, and that's the idea, to get you to hook into that it has some feeling, it has some emotion, and when they, trick you into, in this sense, I mean, it does have intelligence. Obviously, it can play chess very well and do all these other wonderful things, and beat people at games that seem whatever, but it's not human. It's like I say, it's a machine. That's what it'll always ever be, and nothing else.
That's why I remember I shared this video a few couple of weeks ago, maybe. Yeah. I hope you watched at least this one. I'll put the link up for it in a bit. Yeah. Bookmark it, put it on saved, watch for later. What I'll do is I'll go through some of the. I'll just screenshot. This is a Fourier transform. Yeah. And I can't really play the thing, but you see each of those little arrows?
Yeah.
Each of those arrows is basically a circle. It's the radius of a circle, and that circle turns around at a fixed point, right? And there are like up to 1,000 of these, all in a line. They're a little bit like, see? Now you see one on the right. All these circles turning round and round and round can actually draw these figures. Mm-hmm. Now, the reason I played this is, when you talk about these people who have no spirituality, this is such a convincing graphic for a deterministic universe. Because if you can draw that with 1,000 circles, you know, you can draw a man and all his DNA with, what, 20,000 circles, all joined together in a single line. It's all a giant mechanism. You don't need a soul. And this is the kind of, you know, this is the kind of deep myth, this visualization here, that keeps a lot of the scientists in, you know, on the road that they're going, yeah? Because the first thing I saw when I watched that, I thought, wow, man, if they can draw pictures like that, you know, you can do anything with these Fourier transforms. It's not true. It's not true, but it's very convincing, you know. It's almost like a philosophy argument in itself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like materialism.
Materialism, exactly. Yeah.
It's very convincing. It's just that it completely leaves out the animation of the spirit. Yeah, I prefer to use the word spirit rather than soul, but it's basically referring to the same concept. People call it different names, but it's the same concept that we're all referencing.
Yeah, and like if you look at an oak tree, yeah, all the leaves are supposed to be the same, but they're not. They're all a little bit different. Because each of them's got a little bit more or a little bit less sunlight at a different time of day, and they're facing in a different direction.
Epigenetics affects the growth so that you have a fractal repetition, but with a very slight difference because of the epigenetic, the environmental effects on the growth or expansion of that particular thing. So in a virtual space, you can completely write out the epigenetics effect because there's no other things going on that screen affecting the motion of each of those circles. Yeah. And this is something that materialism suffers from. It isolates things almost as if they're in a vacuum. So it considers something without its connections to everything else. It separates it from the rest of the universe and says, this thing is so-and-so, and it has these properties. And it's like, well, yeah, that's the thing on its own if it existed in a void, but it doesn't exist in a void.
Yeah, the further you move away from the simplex, the unification of everything, the more everything becomes individualized and isolated. So you're moving away from the absolute. These people don't have any spirituality.
Yeah. And I think that's a key reason why they pursued this methodology of trying to get people to perceive themselves or to accept the perception of themselves in the virtual space. Because it is a virtual space, therefore it's a void, and it's a void of epigenetics. It's not quite as stark, it's not quite as absolute, because there is a kind of epigenetic, a socially epigenetic effect because of our interactions with each other, like we're doing now. Yeah, that's like a force feedback effect, like epigenetics. But in a controlled space, they can persuade people that they are separate of the effects of the natural universe because you can mold this thing to look however you want because it doesn't suffer the usual epigenetic effect.
This goes a bit deeper as well, see, because I've got another idea here that I want you to put forward. And who provoked me towards this was Jay Dyer, because the guy just has all this philosophical, religious, orthodox theory, but I know the guy has not felt any of these ideas in his heart whatsoever. It's all taglines. Anyway, the other day he was describing Midsummer, the film, versus The Wicker Man. And at one point he says, oh, of course, in Midsummer they're celebrating a pagan festival and the solstice. And of course they're worshipping the sun, who is Lucifer. I was like, whoa. Stop a minute there, Joe. Stop a minute there. Yeah, the sun is Lucifer. Come on, Joe. Now, I realise what they're doing, you see. The whole thing about Satanism is all about putting religion in a Hegelian dialect. Because these people haven't turned their backs on gods and they're embracing Satan. No, they've turned their back on God and Satan and they're embracing science. They've got zero spirituality. They are machine men with mechanical minds.
Yes.
Yeah. And that is the real danger. And Jay Dyer, I think, may even be a part of that. Who keeps upholding this, dialectic between the good and bad religion. This is the new religion, and the virtual world, Cookie, is heaven. They've got a new religion, and it's even got its own heaven, and you can have it now. You don't have to wait for it. Yeah. just plug into the virtual world.
Well, that combined with the stuff I was sort of rambling around earlier, talking about the kind of, you know, potential of major conflicts happening. Part of the reason that they want the 5G rolled out so rapidly, you know, like we've often talked about, there's the usual kind of slew of reasons that you can throw in, you know, automated vehicles and blah, blah, blah. But another part of their reasoning is, if you're going to end up in a global conflict, if you're going to end up in a major war with opposing groups, then you're going to need just as much surveillance on your own people as you have on the enemy. So that level of surveillance state and that real-time monitoring of the populace is going to be able to enable them to manage the mood of the population in relation to the war, the conflict, and the deprivations that come along with it. So very kind of 1984 Big Brother style, they can tell us, you know, there is no war. Meanwhile, there's a war going on somewhere, that kind of shit. But also, I think it's the opportunity that the new environment will give people to immerse themselves in a totally fantasy reality, a virtual reality that will so hypnotize them, it will so enamor them, glamour them, that they'll quite happily ignore what's going on in the real world. So they want it out as fast as possible, so that when the conflicts really start kicking off, they can encourage people to just, oh, forget it all. The government will sort it out for you. You just go and plug yourself in and forget about what's going on in the world. As long as you click on the adverts like we want you to, and you don't jaywalk anywhere, you have fun playing in your virtual reality, and we'll deal with the bad guys in the real world. It's encouraging that level of distraction and disconnection. Again, like I was trying to imply when I said the virtual reality is an opportunity to separate people from themselves and convince them that they are their reflection in the virtual space.
Yeah, well, it's like back. I wrote down MK Ultra back in the day, but that seems to have been refined to the point now where they just do this openly, and this is what the reaction. This is how we see society going, in a sense. How people are reacting to the stimulus that's given to them by the system, through whatever, you know, means you feed off, you know. So it's interesting, yeah, and it seems to not, you know, they like to push it. This conflict in Iran. There's pictures going up now. Apparently, these guys were arrested back in March. I don't know if anyone knew that.
No, I haven't looked far enough into the story to see him mention that. No.
Well, that just came up this evening on RT, saying Iranian media have released some photographs of the alleged 17 spies they've arrested, and saying they're going to publicly execute them or whatever, put them to death. But back in March, this is apparently when this happened. So it's interesting how they, you know, this thing's building up the way it is. And it does look like it's, you know, they've mentioned Iran so many times since 9/11. It's off the scale, you know. It's like, you know, it's, go on, Gary.
Just waiting for the bus to go. Somebody tweeted a Telegraph article saying that, the Telegraph are telling us that intelligence services have told them to beware of an Iranian-backed terrorist attack. Yeah, so is that the predictive programming? And that was sort of like today, yeah? Also today, a tweet from the Israeli foreign minister bragging that Israel is the only country that is actually killing Iranians. So my comment was, give that man a Nobel Peace Prize.
Yeah.
Just
they could have been saying it as well, just in a kind of almost like marketing, preemptively putting the idea out there, so as soon as any kind of attack occurs, they can jump on it and claim that it's the terrorists that they warned us about. You know, so it could be a completely separate group, a completely separate conflict, but something happens and they'll jump on the news and go, oh, look, this is like we warned you. See, they're doing shit. That's our justification. It's like when they kept warning about the gas attacks in Syria. And then, lo and behold, there was an alleged gas attack.
Or the way they try to blame Saddam for 9/11. Well, it might have been it. I mean, well, he's an Arab as well, isn't he? I mean, what's the difference?
He's got a mustache. Yeah, he must be.
I mean, if
got
they
a
want a war,
mustache
they're going to have a
and
war, aren't they? If they want the war, they're going to have it. We've seen that with Iraq. It's been a bit strange over Syria, though. That's been a bit more broken and, you know, disjointed. Didn't go the way they, I think, wanted it to.
Yeah.
And then that's still sort of happening out there. There's been no change, as far as I know. The same guy's still in charge in Syria.
Yeah.
So that's all sort of still, you know, there's still incursions, there's still little battles going on in the country, but it seems to have gone quiet, and now the focus has moved on to Iran, it seems. And now Trump's been in for what, a few years now, building up nicely to that.
It's also it acts as a little bit of a cover to a lot of other stuff that's happening at the same time around what will become Kurdistan, because that conflict area on the northern side of Syria is still progressing the way they want, the way Brzezinski talked about years ago when he said there will be a balkanization of the Middle East and there will be a new state created called Kurdistan. And that's happening in the background, and it's hardly ever mentioned in the news, the mainstream news anyway. You know, there's some alternative independent news stories that still cover it and mention it every so often, but the mainstream news is not reminding us or reminding the public that that is happening at the same time as all this stuff that is, you know, really it's kind of like the southern coast of Syria and Iran, yeah, whereas the Kurdistan is the northern side of Syria. But all of that area is being agitated and destabilized. Don't forget the war in Yemen, which even though they tried to have a protest, this was in the USA, there was some kind of bill, like a petition bill that they tried to put through to stop the arms sales to Saudi Arabia and stuff like that. That's all still ticking along. So all of that area, you could draw a big circle around that area, and don't forget how it butts up against Afghanistan and Pakistan.
It's interesting because Syria's army's quite big and strong, and it's interesting how they're keeping them very nicely occupied whilst all this is taking place around them in that sense.
And then, just to add a kind of usual caveat in at this point, because the stuff I'm mentioning in no way means I agree with or support the Russian side in this argument, because they're utilizing Syria just as much as the Americans are utilizing their proxy forces. You know, they're not really making any major efforts to sort of put up a front line effect in Syria. They're doing it in a kind of low-level way. For example, they'll only sell them certain anti-missile systems. So in other words, they're making sure that Syria is still nowhere near able to compete on its own feet. It remains subordinate to them coming in and helping. Yeah. So they ain't good guys. Don't get the idea that one side's good and one side's bad. No, they're all fuckers.
Yeah,
they're all utilizing similar tactics to carry out this situation.
Yeah, and it carries on, I say, and it's going to, obviously, with things developing now with these hostages, that's new today, isn't it? That's only just happened.
Well, that's when I saw the news today.
On the news, anyway. Like I say, it happened back in March, apparently, but yeah.
But that's sometimes the logistics of things means, you know, we get reported, or we get the reports in effect after the fact. I know that sounds a bit obvious, but I don't mean just in the sense of the time it takes for somebody to send the video footage of the explosion back to BBC headquarters. No, I mean in the sense of, like the Iranian action, they captured those people months ago, but they've sat on them, and there's been this background, probably diplomatic to-ing and fro-ing between both sides. You know, they probably notified the Americans that they've captured their people and shit like that. And none of that has been told to us until it becomes an important part of the justification narrative now. So now Trump can turn around and go, oh, look how bad they are. They've captured our guys and they're going to execute them in the town square. We need to get them.
Barbaric and all this,
That's kind of like, I suppose I could call it propaganda logistics. They deliberately hold information back so that can be woven into the narrative that suits their purpose, and we're only told about it when it suits their purpose.
Yeah. And the way they've been softening everybody up for this type of thing, which they do a lot, especially, like I say, with Iran. It's been mentioned constantly for the past 18 years now, more. You know, Tony Blair never shut up about it. Do you remember?
Yeah,
Iran.
Iran.
And it's always been there in the background, especially with the nuclear thing, you know, where they were potentially going to, you know, develop a weapon, and they're saying they're just using it for nuclear power, for, you know, power stations, and, you know, for peaceful means.
I know this will dig open a massive rabbit warren of holes going in different directions for people. But if you wanted to look for more information from a certain angle, a certain perspective, then Iran as the target adds into the kind of the elders of Zion, you know, the protocols of Zion. I know some people think it's a fake and whatever, but there's mention of this kind of stuff in other sources as well, such as Pike's work, the morals and dogma and whatever, where they talk about how they needed a Muslim state and an Islamic theocracy state, because it's required to get that Hegelian process, so they can have the Christians on one side, the Muslims on the other side, clashing with each other, you know. And I think, as he put it, and then we'll utilize the anarchists and the other peoples to cause chaos and bring down the nations of the world, and, you know, all that kind of shit. So the reason I say it can be a lot of rabbit holes to look into is because some of this stuff goes back a long time. You know, so you could end up pursuing threads of information that there's a wealth of stuff out there for you to look at that connect to it. But it's not a new agenda. The fact that they're targeting Iran in particular is not a new idea. It's not just because Iran is naughty people all of a sudden in the world. You know, remember, the state was only founded in the 70s.
79, wasn't it?
I think so. 79.
When, or was it before then? I'll have to check.
I'm not sure. I know it was the 70s, but
that was the coup, wasn't it? When it took over, I think. And
when they took the Shah out.
Yeah.
And that in and of itself is a controlled event. That wasn't a natural, organic event by the people.
Yes.
That was another agency spy game event that was part of this global propaganda, global agenda, I should say.
Yes. They put their CIA agents everywhere, don't you know, in every guise and every form. They go in and they'll be there for years and years and establish even, you know, legitimate, you know, it's a legitimate thing, but they are CIA. They work in there. They are all undercover, and that's what they do. They've been doing that since after the Second World War, anyway, in those times, and especially in the 60s and 70s, in the what you would consider to be the South American or banana republic type nations back then, and where they were going into those countries, destabilizing, using the same techniques and methods to take over really effectively, with their own government, put in their own puppet government who would do exactly what they want, and they're still doing that now. So
disaster capitalism.
Yeah.
Used to destabilize and weaken a nation so that it can then be absorbed into the empire.
Yeah.
Forcibly absorbed, either through force of arms or through financial coercion and contractual obligations and shit like that. Hence things like the IMF.
Yeah.
You know, if they can hook you in through a financial ball and chain, because basically that's what they do.
It's the banks. They want you. The banks want to own everything. Your country, the lot.
Well, who owns the banks?
Yeah, exactly.
That's the thing. You keep following that chain higher and higher up the pyramid. You know, the banks are major players, but they're not the top of the pyramid. But yeah, it goes on, and it gets more and more intense. And that's why I say I'm fed up with people talking about fear porn and doom porn and whatever.
What's funny, you mentioned doom, and doom backwards is what? Mood.
Yeah. What mood are you in? And it becomes a ridiculous joke when you're trying to tell people that their house is on fire, and they go, "Oh, you're just trying to make me afraid." So you should be afraid because your fucking house is on fire. That doesn't mean you should be crippled by the fear. That's the difference. People have got this obsession that they just want to remove the fear because it's somehow the fear itself is what's the bad element. No, you're missing the point completely. The fear is there for your benefit.
Mm.
I know that sounds,
To see it and understand it as well.
counterintuitive. But
Yeah, like doing the work on yourself, that inner work we always go on about and stuff that you should be doing, or trying to sort of do some of that introspective stuff and looking in the mirror and all that stuff. And it's true, if we do more of that, that would be better for people. I think. I mean, I think I've witted on about it for years and years and years, as you know, about that kind of stuff. But it's important for people to do that sort of stuff and stop and think and realize it's them, and it's that you're the sentient being. You are here. You're unique. Everyone is. It's not these crazy psychopaths who want to just come and do what they're doing and take us down this, like you say, this sort of manipulation. And fear is what they've always used. They've always used that, because what happens when people go out and maybe protest, especially in this country. They come down hard and heavy on people. And that puts people off. They don't want to put themselves in that situation or whatever. And that's fear, or someone knocking on the door with an official looking uniform on or something, whatever it may be, and then suddenly, what's going on here? That's the sort of fear. That's the ingrained stuff, the subconscious stuff they put into people's minds. When they hear a siren, oh, what's going on? Woo, 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 loads of cop cars, woo, woo, that sort of getting people into those sorts of modes of constant. That's the fear I think I'm talking about. The fear that I think most people have. And they can't deny that. Most people will stand a bit more shocked if they suddenly get pulled over or whatever it is, or there will be that sort of element to things with most people, and that's part of the programming. And by losing some of that, taking your power back a little bit, not being rude and offensive and all that, so you get arrested and all these sorts of things. But just doing it in a calm manner, or whatever, you should be taking some energy back in that sense and growing from that. You grow from it. You think, right, okay, that's okay now. And you move through those phases, you move through those different growth spurts you have in your energy awareness and stuff like that, as you move forward. It's about moving forward, as you've always said, on these
supposedly you've got to be careful with that phrase, though, because it's a Luciferian phrase.
Oh, well, moving forward up to a point of you are continually going in that sense. So you have to rest and recuperate and do all those things, but in a sense of getting stuck down rabbit holes, getting too immersed in something that is actually doing you no good, in the end, maybe physically or mentally, whatever, they're the things I'm talking about. That's where you should just know you've learned enough. Now it's time to move forward. And that's
interesting. Oh, go on.
Well, I just wanted to, one of the key points is that discerning or differentiating between a genuine danger that you're afraid, when you're talking about them utilizing fear against people, what the state absolutely relies on is you being persuaded of a fear of a phantom. Like the classic Plato quote, which I've shown a few times or read out a few times. Whenever the people are complacent, the leader needs an enemy, whether real or otherwise, so that he can use that to make the people fearful, so that they then want a leader or need a leader. There's a classic trick of the state. It needs you to be in fear. The trick, the knowledge, is the being able to discern or differentiate between, is this a genuine fear of something that could genuinely do me harm or be bad for me, or is this just that fantastical phantom that they want me to be afraid of? So like you said, when you hear the siren, your mind in general, most people, my mind when I was younger, was programmed to react in that kind of way of, like, as soon as you hear it, you start getting afraid, because you know that the siren equals bad things happening. They might be happening to you. You don't know. It's one of those unknowns, but you've heard the warning siren that says bad things are going to start happening. So you get afraid, and that fear the state utilizes against you. But what we're talking about here is trying to look at what's going on in the world and going, well, actually, that could be a genuine danger. It might not necessarily physically threaten me. I might not be in threat of my life directly, because I'm not actually in the conflict zone, but that doesn't mean it's not going to fuck up my life. it could be a major problem for me in many different ways. So like the storm on the horizon, being aware that it's there, notify or acknowledging the fear that you've seen this dangerous thing that is a real possibility, then you can start redirecting your energy to avoid it or deal with it or prepare for it, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, like the Iraq War. Look at the amount of people in America who were like in the National Guard, or who thought they were going to do one tour in the military and were literally forced to go back and do a second and a third.
Yeah, and to give up a limb or two.
Yeah, I mean, you know, they weren't expecting that even when the Iraq War came along. Nobody was really expecting that. It's interesting what Pete mentioned about going forward, because we're in a big retrograde time now. A lot of planets move in retrograde, and I've really felt that, you know? So going retrograde is like sort of when you go shopping and you get to a second or third shop you're going to, and then you realise you forgot something and you walk past one of the shops. So you had to go back along the same path. And it could even be, you know, walking through a woodland. And sometimes retrograde can be good because you can think, oh, I've got to go back along my path. But I've already half stamped the path down. That's good. But sometimes it's like walking through mud, and then you've got to turn around and go back through the same mud, and it's even more difficult. Yeah. So there is a sort of confusion about what direction time is travelling in right now, with a lot of planets going retrograde. Old stuff keeps getting dug up. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, in that sense, again, it's making me think as well. It's like repeating the past. Because in your analogy, you know, you're saying going to past the same shops again, it maybe amplifies that sensation of like we're just repeating something that's already happened. You know, like they did with Syria, like they did with Libya. It's like, oh, okay, now we're up to Iran. We're in a repeat again.
Yeah.
As well, I was thinking that it only retrogrades so far and then it swings back forwards again, doesn't it? So at some point, you're going to get that sensation that you're back in the rapids of the water again, and it's going to start moving quickly forwards.
But being a perfectionist, you're actually travelling the same path 3 times. A part of it, you're travelling the first time back to the retrograde point, and then the first 2 weeks or whatever, you know, the first period after a retrograde, you're going along that same path for the 3rd time now. You picked up what you've forgotten, and now you're back on your path again, but you've still got to repeat a little bit of it first.
Yeah.
The bit you went, came back, and you're going again. Yeah.
Two steps forward, 1 step back.
Yeah.
Just keep on dancing. Let me say hello to everyone in the chat. If I can scroll it back, see if it'll let me get right back to the beginning. It will. Cool. Makes a change. I just sort of considering it's like 9:45 now. If I don't do it now, it usually takes me like 10 minutes to do it. Paula B, hello. Hope you're enjoying the sun today. It has been fairly nice and sunny today, so it makes a change.
Very warm.
Maybe the summer's coming back. You know, supposedly we're going to get some of that major heat wave that's going over Europe at the moment. So my cynical piss take a couple of weeks ago, that one sunny day, you know, I said, that's your summer. I hope you enjoyed the summer 2019. That was it. Yeah, I'm quite happily wrong if we're going to get some decent sunny weather back again. We have some late summer. But anyway, I'm rambling already. Dave Iron, hello. Thanks for joining us, folks. Gary and Peter and all there in the chat room. And Dottie, the cannabis-based life form, formerly known as a non-violent extremist. How many different names? Authentic human programming, hello. This is genuine human programming, none of your synthetic stuff. Michael Allen, hello. Zoom is supposed to be very good. That's another new platform, isn't it? Video platform that started up. And lots of Tatfro, hello. New being, hello. Yeah, having a good summer so far, apart from the state bullshit that they're dangling over me, you know, but that's usual kind of shit. Scrolling down, hello everybody, thanks for joining in the chat. And thanks for giving us your attention for approximately a couple of hours so far. Roberto Carlos, hello, fucking astronauts. Astronauts, I'll get it now. Fucking astronauts. And Apfel Charlotte, hello. Now I know, after Steve said that's the German spelling, I never knew that was the German spelling. So sorry. I'm not even sure how to pronounce it. Apfel Charlotte, hello. Scrolling. Blazing Stars, hello. 200 tons of, I guess you mean space junk. 200 tons of space junk gets added per year. Yeah, so it gives you an idea of just how much of that kind of leftover shit is floating around up there. I know it's a big area for it to be floating around in, but there's only certain zones that certain satellites will work in terms of vertically. Yeah, so certain satellites need to be at a certain altitude to do what they do, and that means there's like banding effects of that junk. Some of the bands are filled with more junk than the others, shit like that. But of course, they still want to get up there. And Steve, hello, Steve. Steve did a broadcast on Thursday night this time. I missed it live, but I caught up with it afterwards rather than Saturday night. So check his channel going forward. I think he said Saturday sometimes it's not easy for him, so he'd more likely do a broadcast on a Thursday night instead. So check his channel, and one of those nights I'm sure he'll be broadcasting again, and we'll figure it out as we go along. I'm trying to find, I know there was a comment somebody was asking me about the Hangout stuff, which I will find if I can. I'm just looking at names at the moment to try and make sure I give everyone a mention, a shout out. Remember, this doesn't mean you're famous. Neodog, hello. Will you announce a new method of Hangouts on your channel? I'll probably, yeah, in some fashion. When we figure out what we're going to do, if needs be, I'll put up a video on the channel. I'll just upload a video to explain what we're going to do and when and stuff like that. Scrolling down. Pete Shear. Who's Pete Shear? Hello. The sword is the S word. Yes, it is, definitely. And Gas Mask, hello. Oh, hang on. Chat box jumped ahead of me then. I think it just caught up with a load of new messages being posted. So I'm just scrolling down quickly. Any link going? I have much to say on these topics. I have my own channel. If you mean link into the Hangout, no. Sorry, I don't do open Hangouts. I feel I've had a go at doing that in the past, and in the long run, it doesn't work out well. It gets abused far too much by people. So I prefer to just work with people I know, and I know it's been somewhat of a regular kind of Hangout panel that we get on most of the time. But I prefer to stick with that for now, because trying to do the open Hangouts, it just got abused too often, and too many people trying to playing the ego game. Basically, they want to be the one. They want to be the. I know I talk a lot, but this is my particular broadcast, so it's my opportunity to do all my blurb, and that's my space to do my thing in. But when you do the open Hangouts, you can, especially when there's a lot of people in the room, it can get somewhat disjointed, and you often end up with a bit of a sort of lopsided thing happening where 1 or 2 or 3 people will do all the talking, and everybody either gets elbowed out or left out in some fashion, and it becomes a bit unbalanced. That's why I like doing it like this, because then everybody can get an opportunity to say what they want. And so anyway, long explanation. No, sorry, no link. And James Owen, hello. The lurker has appeared. And Dino, hello. Hope you're all right, mate. It's going to be 30 odd tomorrow. So temperature, I can feel it now getting warmer. So yeah, 30 odd cool.
36
Good.
down in London, I think, something like that.
Bloody hell.
Yeah,
That'd be a bit, let's get into that kind of film of sweat stage when it's up that kind of temperature.
Yeah.
So thanks for joining us, folks. Thanks for joining in the chat. If you wanted to, it is there for that purpose. You're not required to, but it's there as a space for people to chat if they want to. And thanks for giving us your attention for a couple of hours. I know, like I've repeatedly said now, but over the years of doing this kind of stuff in this environment, I've found that you have to make these repetitions again and again and again, because you end up being accused again and again and again of the same bullshit, the same fallacious arguments getting used, etc. If you find this information, if you find the kind of stuff I'm talking about, we're talking about, to be fearful or just meant to scare you or whatever, it's not at all. Please try and work through your fear and try and make your way towards that point where you, for yourself, from your own thinking, can make better judgments, better decisions, better discernment between what you should really genuinely be afraid of and what is just bullshit, propaganda, phantasm, fantasy crap that gets pushed out across the internet just to exploit people through fear. That's not the intention of what we're doing here at all, even though we often talk about some quite dark subjects, and it seems quite depressing and dark and macabre and whatever. It's not meant to be taken that way.
Things aren't as simple as they used to be. In the old days, we'd be picking nuts or fruits, and there'd be a roar, and fear meant, okay, we're either going to fight, or we're going to run like fuck, or we're going to climb a tree. So there's a certain amount of excitement there with fear as well. That's why some people get, that's why people get addicted to it, especially if they know it's not real. It's, somebody else will go fight this war. I think the jolly old British Empire, I want to go and teach this Johnny Iranian fella.
It's been, we have talked about it in the past a few times, and we talked about what I feel is the reality, the fact. I feel it's a fact. It is a fact that the state utilizes that effect. Not just the state, corporations do it as well for commercial reasons, but they know people get a thrill out of being afraid. That's why we have fun fair rides and ghost houses and all that kind of shit. And it's why people love watching things like ghost stories and horror movies and whatever. So in this environment, even though, I'm often referencing the mainstream media and stuff like that, even though we're supposedly looking at news sources, they will use the same technique, they will use the same methodology, and independent sources, for donkey's years, this has been true in terms of the kind of conspiracy genre. There's always some conspiracies, some ideas that are just purely about that kind of thrill ride effect. People want to feel a little bit scared, and then they turn the documentary off and they turn their lights on in their room, and all of a sudden everything's better and they feel good about themselves and they've just had a bit of fun, basically.
Again, when life was simpler, we'd be sitting around the campfire saying, cool, you remember about a year ago when that lion came, you all had to run away, and the kids would be listening to us telling the story, and they'd get scared, and there was a time when people knew they were being told a story. There were clear distinctions. Now, people just everything's run into one stream of manipulation. It's almost like that French, I've never found the guy's name, French philosopher, who described an evening's television like a string of emotional DNA. All the different emotions that you go through, the fear, the lust, the excitement, they're like the different steps on a piece of DNA. And your night's programming is like a protein, and then it's going to produce a certain reaction. It's going to produce a certain, chemical. The proteins are little factors.
Epigenetically, it affects you and your life.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's what the guy was getting on at. Yeah, all that programming, you can put it together.
I'm not 100% sure, but I'm guessing, considering the kind of philosophical point of view he had, and it's one that I latched onto years ago when I was reading philosophy, it's probably Foucault. I'm not sure exactly on the pronunciation. Focault, I think, is the spelling of his last name.
It could be, but it's fairly recent. I think 1970s Marxist philosopher, because he was talking about television specifically.
I think he was writing in like the 50s and 60s, so it might have gone into the 70s as well. I'm not sure on that one.
Okay.
But it was when they were showing us the kind of differences in political philosophy about how to govern people, and you had the differences between the kind of overt determinism of a very absolute top-down system of authority, which was Weber was the main guy they used to argue that, and Foucault was like the decentralized, more maybe a little bit Marxist, but I took it more that it was more socialistic. Again, very sort of modern French style socialistic. So a little bit of libertarianism kind of stuff, but it was more decentralized structure of power. So he was I felt he was much more aware of that kind of symbiotic reality that we live in. You know, you interrelate with different groups and circles and functions within your society, and all of them have a feedback effect on you and your life and your psychology. Yeah, Weber was just like, people obey, they do, and they get on with it because they're told to. Yeah.
But people also forget that the Marxists are part of a controlled part of the Hegelian dialectic. So any good philosopher, you know, one side can label it, they can say, oh, he's just a Marxist. And the Marxists are quite happy to say, oh, yes, he's one of ours. He's one of ours. Yeah. I mean, people get pushed from both sides into the little box.
It's something that maybe we could come back to next week, because if being that 27th episode, and if I do decide to like move on to season 3, you know, close this hangout season off with that episode, but we could talk about that classic point, which I think that quote is sort of signposting to us, is that where do you get your authority from? And that externalization of authority, and once you push that too far, then you become in effect an automaton, where the method of programming, you know, the method itself changes over the years. You know, we've moved from the television age to the internet age. The same kind of programming is still taking place, but instead of being on the television, now it's via the internet, you know, that kind of point. But yeah, it'd be a good place to leave it. And I will say thanks very much for tuning in, folks. Keep looking, keep thinking before they make it illegal. Well, it already is, supposedly, but you know, they ain't locked up my brain yet. They're not yet, anyway. But anyway, before I digress into too much silliness, thanks for tuning in, folks. We'll catch you again soon. Please check the Reality Chat channel for Wednesday night. We should be on Wednesday night.
Yeah,
and
Wednesday, 8 o'clock. Yeah.
As I mentioned earlier, check Steve Tagusi's channel. He'll be on either Thursday or Saturday, or maybe even both. I don't know yet. But we shall see. And there's plenty of other good brands out there available, which I'm sure you can choose for yourself, because it's your choice. you choose. And yeah, I should hopefully 99% certain I'll be back again next week for that number 27. So take care, folks. I'll catch you again soon.
Cheers, Cookie.
Cheers, and
Thank you.
cheers.